Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM NBA Radio. He writes at Forbes that Jimmy Butler saves the Sixers because Markelle Fultz has been a complete disappointment to this point. We'll get into that. The Sixers, the Raptors last night, the East, the NBA, with our good buddy Mitch Lawrence from Sirius XM NBA Radio, Forbes, and the Sporting News here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Welcome back, Mitch. How are you, pal?
Gentlemen, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. What's going on today down there your way?
Man, well, the Sixers go to Toronto. They get their butts kicked again, but did they close the gap? I mean, last time they went there, they got destroyed. They were in the game for 3.5 quarters, kind of fell apart late.
Yeah.
Is Butler closing the gap in the East here?
Well, I don't know if he's closing it with Toronto. But, yeah, I think overall the problem with the Sixers is they still have some moves to make. I mean, they need somebody off the bench who can, shoot perimeter-wise. We'll see if they do that. But, yeah, when you get Jimmy Butler, obviously, I mean, you saw it, not last night, but you saw it in previous games where they got a guy who can close out a game. You don't have to draw up a play for him to get him the ball. I mean, before he got there, you couldn't obviously count on Fultz because he's a complete disaster. Ben Simmons doesn't want to shoot. He can't shoot free throws. He won't shoot threes. So that kind of eliminates him late in games. And then, you got to figure out a way to get J.J. Redick the ball, get him open, run him around, and drop a play. Here you just hand the ball to Butler, as you saw against Charlotte and Brooklyn. Now, it wasn't last night, but I think obviously they've improved. But, yeah, the roster still needs some work.
Let's, you look at what Butler brings, and they still need to add some things. Do you believe, based on this latest Fultz stuff, Mitch, that the Sixers are ready to wash their hands and move on, or are they buying in that there is some hope that this guy could be the guy that we once saw on tape wearing a purple uniform?
Well, I mean, if you're ready to wash your hands and move on, don't you want to get something for him? And the problem with that is, right now, he's not worth a bag of balls. I don't know who would trade for him, what you're going to get for him. I think the ideal thing would be see what happens off his rehab for what he's being treated now, this syndrome, which we've seen in baseball before and other sports, and see if you can get him back and what he can do on the court for you. And then if you feel like, he's been a headache, he's not worth it, however your reason where you're going to go with this guy, if you don't want to get him, then you make a move, then you try to get something for him. But, that's off in the very far distance. I mean, the saving grace, and this is what I wrote about in Forbes, right now is that Jimmy Butler is the player who can do things that you wanted Fultz to do down the road, to close games, to be a guy who can make shots from all over the court. He hasn't shown he's got a lot of problems, obviously, confidence-wise between his ears, et cetera. So at least you got Butler now, and it's just going to be very interesting to see what happens with Fultz. How long does it take for him to retire? What happens when he gets back on the court, his confidence level, et cetera, et cetera. It's just been, as you know, a nightmare. And I think for that organization, they did great by getting Jimmy Butler in.
Mitch, I just thinking of the phrase, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, right? Shame on me. And I look at it not with you, obviously, but with Markelle Fultz, because this would now be the third time since he came into the NBA that something isn't right, he goes away, and then the team, trainers, in practice, off-season, everybody's like, hey, he looks good, send him out there. And the reason why I bring it up this time, which is the most crucial, is to your point about Jimmy Butler's arrival. I don't know how that sits with Jimmy Butler, who sold on the, we're bringing you into Philadelphia to win, with, hey, we need to reintegrate a kid we're still not sure of in what could be costly February minutes.
Well, first of all, Jimmy Butler's not worried about Markelle Fultz because right now he looks at Markelle Fultz as a non-entity. He's not even able to play. So I don't think like Jimmy – I think all Jimmy Butler wants to do is behave better than he did in Minnesota, get people in Philadelphia who are in charge to give him the, $200 million, whatever he's going to make, $190 million, and not worry about – he's not worried about Markelle Fultz. He's now worried about –
Well, not now.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Mitch. Not now. Not now, but I mean 6 weeks, 8 weeks down the line if it comes to that point.
First of all, who says Fultz will be back that soon? I mean, that's what they're saying.
I hope not.
Sounds like it could be longer. You never know. But I think, the thing about Butler is Butler's now in a dream. He's in his dream position where he's getting the ball late in games. He obviously likes playing with Simmons and Embiid better than he did Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. He likes where he is, and they're getting him the ball. And, he's in a position where he thinks he's going to be able to make the big lottery score that he wanted in Minnesota. He wasn't going to get there because they've already paid Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. So I think he's fine. But you know what? Let's see how long it takes for Fultz to get back. It's not going to cost, let me tell you, it's not going to cost Jimmy Butler his minutes because, as we saw in Minnesota, Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins weren't going anywhere when Jimmy Butler was out. When he came back, they got to the playoffs. So Jimmy Butler is an established player, and he's going to make the difference in terms of Philadelphia, where they finish, and they're going to need him. And so everything from his point of view is looking fine. He, like I said, he's not worried about Markelle Fultz.
Right, and let me clarify, I guess, a little more. It's not so – and Jimmy was my first example because of his new arrival. But I guess if the team is fighting for tops in the Eastern Conference in the regular season, and let's say, hypothetically, the kid does come back in 8 weeks, in 2 months, and now all of a sudden your scenario, I think that you laid out, which is, they need to reintegrate him into this team to kind of see what they can do if they could trade him in the offseason. So it's not necessarily Butler's concern that he's going to take minutes away from him in Fultz. It's just these guys are working towards a goal, and then all of a sudden somebody, maybe Brett Brown or management, says, hey, we need to get another look at Markelle Fultz. Do you think that, from a team standpoint, could be problematic?
Could be. But I think also you have to, if he's ready and you think he can help, you have to reintegrate him back in the team. Probably be a bench role, right?
I hope.
Yeah, well, of course. Because Jimmy, the one thing about Jimmy Butler we know is that Jimmy Butler is going to start and he's going to contribute, and he's going to contribute to you winning in the regular season. In the playoffs, it's going to be interesting too because Jimmy Butler doesn't have the greatest resume in the playoffs. He talks like he does. He carries himself like he does, but, he hasn't been – when he was a leader in the Bulls, with the Bulls, they didn't get past, the first round. So never got past, deep in the playoffs. So we'll see how it all shakes out. It's a very interesting thing, but right now they just have to go about their business and win games and not worry about Markelle Fultz because they got a lot of work to do before that. With Toronto, the way Boston is in the East, they've come on a little bit here. Milwaukee looks like they're going to be a top 4 team. You know what? There's a lot going on where Philadelphia has to take care of its business and let Markelle Fultz deal with what he needs to deal with off the court, and hopefully get him back, and maybe he can be a bench contributor.
Yeah. Well,
Amen.
But okay, so
Enough
you mentioned
with this
it.
kid.
A lot of baseball players, pitchers,
have
had this injury.
Yeah.
So
Matt Harvey, right?
When you talk to NBA players here, like this is what his issue is, are people just kind of rolling their eyes and scoffing, or are they saying, "Hey, you know what? This makes more sense," or is it
because of what's happened? You mentioned this is now several things with his shoulder. A lot of people are very skeptical about what the diagnosis has been. It took them 10 specialists to find this out. Are the Sixers really involved? There's a lot of stuff swirling, maybe unfairly, but that's the way it is because right now he's been such a what's the term I want to use? Disaster, I guess.
Yes.
Just in terms of. Or the mystery around the shoulder in the past, and all this stuff about leaving the team to go find a specialist. That there are a lot of people who are basically looking at it. Is it really just the fact that he's got a shoulder thing, he's got this syndrome, or is it more of there's problems with him just in terms of the mental aspect of being a professional? Who knows? We don't know about that. That's a very big question out there, and it's fair to kind of speculate because of what we've seen from him so far in 2 years.
Right. Well, and Mitch, this is where Eitan and I have battled on this. Is because he's 20 and he's the number 1 pick, he's going to keep getting chances. Until he's deemed 24, 25, and this is who he is. But
he will get tons of chances, especially Philadelphia has to give him a chance because what they gave up for him.
They can't just say, "Hey."
Before,
like Eitan said, "Fool me once, fine. Show me twice." They're going to give him 3, 4, 5.
He's about to tell you why you're wrong. Go ahead, Mitch, please.
They invested a lot in him. Obviously, the Jason Tatum thing also hangs over this whole situation because they could add Tatum. I think any team, and it's just not the Sixers. If you took a guy number 1 overall and you gave up extra assets to get him in the draft, you're going and now. Elton Brand didn't draft him, so he's not as attached to him as the previous regime, but I would still think because of where you picked him and what you gave up, yes, you are going to make sure that you give yourself and him a chance to make this thing work. How long that lasts, I don't know. I just don't think they're just going to cut ties with the guy. That would be, to me, idiotic.
Okay.
You can't do that.
let's look at this situation, because I agree with you. You can't simply cut ties, but we know that if a team's going to trade for Anthony Bennett, then a team would trade for Markelle Fultz. It's just a matter of when, not if. And I think that's where I disagree with Mike a lot. This is a matter of circumstance. If a team had offered a 20th first overall pick, somewhere in the back end of the first round for Fultz, I feel like that trade would have already been made. But to your point, so much has been invested that it's tough to just take nothing as a return on the dollar. So my hypothetical to you, Mitch, is what happens this offseason if, in fact, the Sixers cannot find a buyer because Markelle Fultz hasn't played any type of legit minutes to show that he's back this season? There's some money attached. That's $9 million plus attached. Now, around the league, that may not be much, but for the Sixers, who have this small window closing for free agency, how do you bring him back at that point?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to have to, Elton Brand and the guys above him are going to have to figure that out. So I don't have the answer for you. All I know is that they're going to.
Well, what would you do? I trust your basketball knowledge.
Well, I mean, look, first of all, are you going to commit to Jimmy Butler? Point A, that's the big point. If you're committing to Jimmy Butler, then, that may make Fultz more expendable. Mm-hmm. But, look, you got to find out. First of all, you got to figure it out with Jimmy Butler. Is he back? Right. Is he leaving? I mean, that's the big deal. And then from there, you want to build your team obviously around Jimmy Butler, Embiid, and Simmons, right? And then, you know what? Then you see where Fultz is in terms of his rehab, where he is, what he looks like. Does he look like he can be a player for you? If he can you afford him? What you look at all that stuff down the line, and obviously keeping your options open as to if you can move him, get something for him, fine. But that stuff that's so far down the line, I can't even think about that right now. I'm not that close to the situation. But all I'll tell you is I'm sure that team with that investment in him will it's not going to be for a forever deal, but they're going to take their time here, and they're going to see what happens when he comes back, what he looks like, and if they feel like he can be a contributor at a decent price tag, now we'll see. I mean, look, he might decide Philadelphia is not for him. Who knows? Who knows what's going on? Has he really even addressed anything involving any of this stuff, Markelle Fultz? You never see the guy quoted, so who knows?
How right now, Mitch, we're getting close to Christmas, which is kind of like the launching off point in the NBA. But when you look at the East, where do you got? Where's your top four in the East right now?
Toronto's far and away the best team. Kawhi's made a great adjustment there, which I thought he would, considering, he wants to score a big contract. He's a free agent. I just don't know if this could be a one-and-done thing with him in Toronto. I know people in Toronto think they got a chance to re-sign him. I still think he's going to be a Clipper. I think he'll leave, go back to Southern California and be a Clipper. And then they're going to have to blow up their team because and I think that's why Kyle Lowry is in such a bad mood these days, because I think that's what their game plan is going to be, which means he'll be out the door, and along with Ibaka, and they'll just have to break it up. But Toronto right now is the class of the East, the way they've played, the way Kawhi is a top player in the league, one of the top, 5 players, and it shows. I mean, that team is a markedly better team with him versus DeMar DeRozan. After that, Boston, I still think I'm not giving up on Boston at all. I think they got to figure it out. They've had a big change here this year with Kyrie Irving back in the fold, with Gordon Hayward. They made the same mistake Philadelphia made by starting. They shouldn't have never started Fultz. In Boston, they never should have started Hayward. They should have had both guys. These guys come off the bench, get their confidence back, earn their time back, et cetera, especially Fultz, who's got no track record compared to Hayward. And then, figure out all these young guys there who are, the Jaylen Browns and the Jason Tatums who are so young. They got to figure out how where they are in the pecking order. I still love Tatum as the number 2 guy. We'll see. I still think they're going to be in there at the end. I think it'll be a Toronto-Boston thing at the end with Milwaukee, with Philadelphia on the kind of the next tier down. Not totally giving up. I want to see what Philadelphia does in terms of their roster. And in terms of Milwaukee, everybody raves about Giannis Antetokounmpo. We all know he hasn't been out of the first round. And there's some other things about that team that I just don't trust. I don't trust Eric Bledsoe in big spots. It's just who knows? Now, those are the 4 teams that could win it in the East. That's about it. And I give Toronto and Boston the best chance.
What do you think has been the issue with Boston? Because, I get it. I was one of the people in the offseason that said they're not just going to throw these 2 guys in here and win 60, 65 games. They're they're not head and shoulders better than everybody. It's going to be a little clunky. I didn't think they'd be a 500 team.
Yeah, I didn't either. I thought, you know what, when they're 500 after a quarter of the season, but it's just one of these things where you got a ball dominant guy in Kyrie. Sometimes he looks for other guys. Sometimes he looks for himself. I think it's you got to remember they did their playoff run with Rozier, right? It wasn't Kyrie. Kyrie was out. So I think that's a factor. I think, you had Hayward for 5 minutes of all of last year. You got they've got a very deep team. They've got guys on the bench who are very good. You're going to have unhappy players who don't play like Rozier. So I think there's a lot of stuff there that Brad Stevens, who is very much a Teflon guy in Boston, he hasn't won anything, but they've gotten better every year, obviously record-wise. But he's getting a big pass. And the other thing, we're all accustomed to how Danny Ainge takes the long view. They never panic. They're always taking a long view on stuff. So that kind of affects how at least in terms of how I think about them. And I just think they're just going to, they'll hit their stride at some point. The other thing that, also works against them, remember last year I think they got off to a 16-2 start, which we were all floored by. I don't know if you remember that, but, you weren't going to have that this year. But then again, like I said, I didn't think they'd be, just around 500. They've taken off a little bit here, but they got to start putting up some quality wins. You know what? Beating the Knicks tonight, that's not a quality win. I know they lost to the Knicks just a little while ago, but they got to start putting up some big-time wins against some of these teams. I think they've beaten Toronto, and that's basically about it.
Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM, NBA Radio. Check out his piece at Forbes.com on the Sixers getting Jimmy Butler.
Are you?
Go ahead.
No, are we done? Because I was going to.
No. I had a couple things for him real quick.
Okay, well, can I jump in there too, or
I wanted to just ask him if he has heard anything about Melo.
Okay.
Oh, Carmelo.
Carmelo. I'm about to ask about Ben Simmons. You're asking him about Melo?
Yeah.
Well, I've heard he's not going to play anymore. He's done.
Who cares? I'd rather talk about Markelle Fultz.
Oh. It's interesting. Ben Simmons and Carmelo. One guy loves to shoot. One guy doesn't want to shoot.
Yes. We need more Melo and Simmons.
The thing about Carmelo, I've talked to people. A lot of people think he's still going to end up in Miami.
Wow.
Well, you know what? He was rumored to be there anyway. Before he went to Houston, before he went to Oklahoma. I mean, over the last few years, everybody's talking about Carmelo in Miami. If you look at Miami, they got to do something, guys. They struck out on Jimmy Butler.
Yep.
They need now. Carmelo Anthony is not Jimmy Butler. Don't get me wrong. And at this stage, he probably needs to come off the bench. But in a culture down there where they do need some scoring, they need somebody who can give them some points. I think you could see him there. There may be a few other teams that go for Carmelo. I don't know at this point. I was baffled, like everybody else. The Rockets gave him all of 10 games. They knew exactly what they were getting. They knew that he was going to, and it seemed like he was okay with his bench role, but for some reason they just didn't want him. So that turned out to be a bad move. And we'll see. You always hear about the Portlands, maybe San Antonios. Teams that do need some bench scoring could go after a guy like Carmelo Anthony. We'll see if it's Miami or not. That'll be interesting.
All right, so as far as Ben Simmons is concerned, we saw that blueprint again last night. And is it simply a matter of the circular discussion of he needs to develop a jump shot, he needs to develop a jump shot? Because I fear, and I think fear is the right word here, Mitch, that he's good enough that this is not going to be an issue for 2/3 of the NBA in the regular season, but it will always be the issue why he and the team may get knocked out in the postseason.
Well, his reluctance to shoot, his inability and reluctance to shoot threes, he's not a good free throw shooter, as we know. Those are all big problems. I mean, you got to, in this day and age, you can't have people in the backcourt who aren't shooting threes. And, that's a big problem. Now, I don't know what's going on inside his head. He just can't be a guy who's going to set people up. That's not good enough in this day and age.
Does he have the thorough vascular condition?
Does he have now what?
Whatever the hell the Markelle Fultz thing is.
Markelle Fultz has some sort of an outlet, something, syndrome or who knows. I don't know. But he has a real mental block about shooting, which you saw. I mean, we've seen that. That's what you knew about Ben Simmons. And I go back to around the draft. I talked to people who said, you know what, he'll never be a good three-point shooter. He'll never be that. He probably won't even try it, but he could develop into a decent mid-range shooter. I don't know what he does in the offseason, but obviously he didn't do anything this offseason to prove to people he shoots the ball. But he has that, it's just this weird thing where you don't see it in this day and age. Everybody comes into the league, guys want to dominate the ball and shoot. He'll dominate the ball, but he doesn't shoot, so that's a problem. But that's why I like the Jimmy Butler move from the standpoint of, you know, if you're looking down a checklist of guys who you want late in a game who are going to be able to be a threat to score, a guy who can create, a guy who's willing to shoot, who's willing to take the big shot. That's not Ben Simmons, but at least that's Jimmy Butler here. And so they really filled that one area. But but in the long term, Ben Simmons is going to have to be a shooter at some point, right?
Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah, well, and it
You're
seemed
right.
that he had played more aggressive and better when Butler first got here. He was averaging like 18 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists over like a 10-game span. But Leonard ate his lunch again last night. I mean,
Leonard. I mean, Leonard's a premier player. The guy I also worry about is Embiid because why does he always look so sluggish? You know, there are points, and I mean, he got killed last night by Valanciunas, which is ridiculous. You can't at this stage. It's one thing to just keep beating up on Andre Drummond and talking about that. That's fine and dandy, but he should be dominating other bigs now. And last night, like he said, he played like trash. I don't know what the solution is, but I watch him play, and I just wonder, why isn't he in better shape? It never looks like he's in tip-top shape, does it?
Well, not consistently. It seems like you're right. He'll have a couple of nights where he is dominating, and then he has one, and now it seems like he'll have a couple where it's like last night, where even if he's being game planned out, he doesn't have enough energy or stamina or whatever the term would be to kind of overcome that. So, yeah,
right.
There's it's cyclical.
Not just offensively.
No, you're right.
Defensively, he should be a monster, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's just if he's not done, you know, when you're playing Toronto, guys, you got to already chalk it up to, well, we're going to lose the Kawhi Leonard matchup because Kawhi Leonard's one of the best players on the court. But you can't win the Joel Embiid matchup with his guy.
Right.
Last night he didn't. That's a big problem.
all right, we'll get you out on this. The West has been interesting. Denver, Oklahoma City, the Clippers, the Warriors are 4th, and the Lakers are 5th. Is LeBron going to take the Lakers as a top 4 Western Conference team this year?
He could. I mean, it's crazy, right? I mean, to me, that would have been going into the year. I figured they're going to make the playoffs because LeBron never doesn't make the playoffs, and I figured a real successful year for him would be to get a first-round home series where you're top 4. And I figured no better than 4th. They're on a pace to win about 50 games, which I thought he was. You're going to have to win at least 47, 48 out in the West to make it. And, yeah, you know what? He could make a top 4 finish. I mean, it's not that crazy. And the teams you mentioned, I mean, it's been a great season just from the intrigue because whoever thought that the Clippers, Memphis, Denver were going to be among the top teams in the West, and the Houstons and the San Antonios of the world were going to be teams that are like, what the heck are wrong with these guys? So, yeah, it's been a great season. But let's not give up on the Warriors. Curry, without Curry, they're a 500 team. With Curry, they're still the class of the field.
All right, we know Christmas Day will be fun. That's when the NBA really takes center stage. Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM, NBA Radio, Forbes.com. He joins us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, Mitch.
Guys, enjoyed it. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Kick Geltzeiler's ass, will you, on Saturday?
Okay. Talk to you later.
He's a great guy.